how to make your AI agents more reliable. This is basically the million-dollar questions. Many people at the moment that build automation, they mostly build workflow automation. So they define a set of rules and constraints into our workflow, and then they just automate this many times using nothing but conditions and logics. And sometimes they often use some LLM calls, like API calls or API calls to other solutions in order to enhance the workflow. But this kind of lacks the flexibility and the dynamic aspects of using an LLM and AI agent powered by an LLM. So obviously, on one hand, we want to control the outcome, so we want predictability. But on the other hand, we want the agents to be dynamic and flexible, because we don't want to think about, let's say we want to automate a process. So we don't want to think about all the edge cases and the whole workflow and just set many logics and many rules, because then there is no dynamic aspect to this. And this isn't necessarily so scalable, and obviously it's not an ideal solution. So at first glance, there seems to be a trade-off between systems that are highly dynamic and flexible and reliability, because when something is very dynamic and flexible, usually the reliability goes down. Now, some business initiatives require more structure and predictability and rules. So for this, we can use RPA workflows or any type of automations, but others require more out-of-the-box thinking and innovation. Now, for these, we use or human beings enhanced with LLMs, or just API calls to an LLM. Now, the problem or the challenge is that in between these two ends of the spectrum of a workflow that is very structured and a very creative initiative, let's say writing creative or copywriting or creating ads, we have many use cases in between in which we want predictability, and we also want out-of-box thinking. So today in this video, I'm going to share with you some interesting features that were published by the AG2 team, formerly known as autogen. And this tool enables more control of the agents. This is going to be a pretty short video. Before I dive into it, I invite you guys to join my newsletter, which is called No Fluff. You can find it at nofluff.online. I send every week, I send like a few bullet points about interesting things that I encountered, research related to AI and automations, tools that I'm using, etc. Now, let me zoom in. Now, increasing reliability can be done in multiple ways, and I've discussed this in many videos in the past, so we are not going to dive too deep into this, but let me give you some context, because I believe context is king, and it's the most important thing for anything that we discuss, to understand the context. So, on one hand, we must remember that LLMs are stochastic, meaning that they can generate different output even with the same input. For example, when you ask an LLM to summarize this article twice, so it might produce two slightly different summaries because it is stochastic. It is working on probability. However, when you add tools and function calling, you introduce deterministic elements. So tools are, as you probably know, are functions that are written with code that they are connected to your agents. So for instance, if the LLM is instructed to call a weather API to fetch the temperature in Paris, it will always return the same factual results as long as the input remains the same and the API is working. So while raw LLMs may vary in their responses because they are stochastic, layering them with structured tools can increase consistency and reliability. So here's like a very cool diagram that the new GPT-4o generated for me. So stochastic LLMs can generate different outputs given the same input. Summarize this article can yield two different summaries, while tools and function calling, they are deterministic, and whenever you call a function, let's say weather API, you're going to get the factual result. Now, besides using tools and adding tools to the workflow, to the agents, which can increase reliability, we have the option of adding reflection agents and human Q&A. Reflection agent refers to adding in each relevant step in the process, adding another agent that understands what was the task at hand and can define whether or not the result was achieved. It can be based on different parameters, and it can score, or it can be like just true or false, or there are many ways to build reflection agents. And obviously human Q&A, basically we add a human in the loop, and the human can see the results so far that were generated by the agent. And based on this, it can provide feedback, and if the human likes what it sees, it can approve, and then the agentic workflow can move forward to the next task in the sequence. Now, these are great. These are not only important, but these are critical. I believe that many people that are building these days workflows, they overlook the reflection agent, and they mostly rely on human Q&A. But more often than not, they don't even rely on human Q&A. They just don't utilize all the possibilities available, and they build a very restrained workflow that doesn't have a lot of flexibility, just to avoid any risk of non-reliability and the LLMs producing hallucinations. So this isn't, in my opinion, isn't a great way to utilize the abilities of the models. And I must add that at the moment, the models, in my opinion, are the biggest, weakest link in the chain. So I'm assuming that in 6 months' time or 12 months' time, when Anthropic and OpenAI and Google release models that are smarter and more reliable, we will be able to build AI agents that are more reliable just by connecting them to better models. So if you build today a workflow that is really choked with many guardrails and many restrictions, in a way, you're doing yourself a disservice, because you will need to adapt and change everything whenever new models appear, which is part of the game on one hand, but on the other hand, I prefer building an agentic workflow with the infrastructure that even when the models change or improve, it will still serve you. Now, moving forward, AG2 team, which you guys know I've been covering a lot of their stuff lately. Not lately, but since they basically launched as autogen, because I really love the innovations that they are bringing and the ideas behind what they are building. And they have, a while ago, they already published the Swarm orchestration. And the Swarm is a concept which is kind of similar to the concept that OpenAI released about AI agents, that allows you, enables you to have a lot of control and structure in the agentic workflow. Now, recently I've built an AI automation, an agentic automation, and I dive deeper into the nuances of the Swarm, and I stumble upon different types of conditions that are implemented in this amazing framework. And since I found these conditions very, on one hand, very powerful, but on the other hand, quite confusing, I decided to do this video. So basically, in the AG2 Swarm module, I guess you can call it model, you have different types of conditions. You have on condition, on context condition, and after work. And I will explain to you each one, what does each one mean. So on context condition, it's like checking your system settings. So if user is admin, true, so do X. So the purpose, it allows rule-based handoff without the LLM. So on context condition doesn't use the LLM, and it just uses context variables to the side. Now it runs first before on condition is called. And now on condition, in opposing to on context condition, is using the LLM in order to determine whether a certain condition is met or not. So the analogy is like asking an LLM a question. So should I switch to another agent if the customer says something specific? So the purpose is to let the LLM decide when to hand off to another agent based on natural language condition. So it can get a context string, a context variable, or just a callable function returning a string condition dynamically. And this runs before after work. And I know that this might sound a bit confusing at the moment. I will give examples in a few minutes, and this will clarify everything. And after work is just a fallback plan, and it defines what happens if no agents take action and no tool is suggested. Now, after work can return, like the fallback can be an agent, it can revert to the swarm manager, it can terminate. As you can see here, there are some after work options which are baked into the library, into the framework, that do things automatically. So after work .terminate means that it's going to terminate the agentic workflow. Revert to user is going to send it back to the user proxy agent. Stay will leave the automation or the workflow, we'll leave the last speaker active. And swarm manager means that the fallback action will be to revert the conversation back to the swarm manager. So the summary of differences is basically, let's say you have a workflow and the first agent did a certain, let's say, did an analysis of a web page. Now you can decide using different types of conditions what should be the next step. So the first condition, on context condition, is you can check with a rule-based condition whether or not you want, after the first agent generated copy, whether or not, if the copy was generated, you can decide a rule-based condition to send the copy to a proofreader, for example. Now, if you don't want to use a Boolean or like a rule-based condition, you can use the LLM to assess and decide. So let's say we have the first agent who generated a copy. Then we write an on-condition handoff. Handoff is basically telling the agent that we want to hand off the conversation to the next agent. We can write an on-condition handoff, and we can use natural language in order to decide whether or not we should revert or move the conversation to the next agent. So for example, a condition can be on condition if copy contains 3 persuasive elements, hand off to proofreader agent. So this is just, pseudocode, me telling you the logic. And let's assume that none of the conditions were met. We have an afterwork if, let's say, if the copy didn't contain the first rule, didn't meet the first rule, which was a condition, and then the LLM condition didn't yield what we wanted. The copy didn't have like 3 persuasive elements. So we have the fallback, which can be revert to user. I hope this is clear. I have another example in a moment. So here's another scenario. But just before I move to the scenario, just as a reminder, on context condition is rule-based, on condition is LLM-based, and after work is just the fallback. Now, it's important to realize or understand that if you have all of these 3 conditions, this is also the order of checking. So first we do a rule-based check, then we have the condition which is sent to the LLM, and only afterwards we go to the fallback, which makes a lot of sense. You can see over here an example of a handoff. This is the documentation by the AG2 team. So there is this, let's say the agent is the triage agent, and he is supposed to, based on these conditions, to define whether or not to cancel a flight or change a flight, for example, or if we need to modify a flight, or if we have a lost baggage, so we need to address this. But obviously you don't have the whole context of this workflow, so this might be a bit confusing, but I highly recommend that you check out this specific notebook afterwards to understand. But bear in mind that the syntax slightly has changed, and this is the updated syntax. I will refer to this in a few minutes. Anyway, just another example to nail this idea. So let's say you have an airline customer support, a team of agents. So you have the main agent, which is called the triage agent, that needs to decide what to do based on the user situation. First, it can route to the lost baggage agent, which handles all scenarios in which a baggage was lost, or you can route to the flight change agent, or you can fall back to the human agent. So the routing agent, the routing logic is controlled using 3 layers of logic. So we have the on context condition, which has a strict rule. Then we have on condition, which uses the LLM to decide whether a condition was met or not. And we have the after work, which is the fallback. So first we have on context condition. And then basically, if context says had lost baggage is true, route to the lost baggage agent. This is basically the first check we do. Like, let's say we have a variable called has lost baggage, and if it's true, so route to the lost baggage agent. And there is no LLM involved, so it's faster and doesn't require tokens, and it's more reliable. So this is perfect when it's more like a factual thing, you know, rule-based. Next, we have the on condition. So basically, this requires the LLM. So let's say we want the LLM to read the user message and decide what we should do next. So for example, if the message sounds like they want to change their flight, route to the flight change agent. As you can see here, we are using natural language in order for the LLM to decide. And then if the LLM analyzes the conversation and it sees that the user query is related to a flight change, it's going to route the conversation to the flight change agent. So it allows nuanced decisions, and it uses natural language, but it's more stochastic, so it's kind of less reliable. Now, let's assume that none of the responses triggered a handoff. What we have a fallback, and if the agent didn't find a clear route, the triage agent didn't find a clear route, we can send the conversation to the human agent, which can be behind the scenes and handle all the scenarios that the previous conditions were not able to solve. And this is why this is so powerful, because it's basically gives us the ability, gives us more control of the workflow. So I guess that's pretty much it. Now, in terms of the syntax has slightly changed. So you can check it out right here. So this is the on condition. This is the on context condition and like a clear explanation of how it looks like. We're supposed to have after work as well. After work. Yes, after work as well. So, and after work options, I think after work options. Let's see if it finds this or not. Never mind, check out the documentation and then you'll understand the whole syntax. For me, I spent a lot of time. I don't know, when I explain this, it seems so clear, but I was pretty confused regarding the difference between on context condition and on condition. So I hope this video serves all of you who are building agents and more complex agents using the AG2 framework. Now, before we conclude, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below with your feedback. Obviously, I invite you to join the No Fluff newsletter. Check it out at nofluff.online. And if you guys need any help with strategy or implementing automations in your business, feel free to reach out. This is my email. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Quick summary. We discussed how to add more reliability into your agentic workflow. Specifically today, we covered a few features that were presented by the AG2 team that basically enable you better control in terms of routing the conversation to which agent you are going to route the conversation using the on condition, on context condition, and the after work mechanisms, which are pretty powerful, but it also requires a lot of testing and optimizing like anything in life. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. Until next time, guys, keep on automating.